"My body's too big, I'm not meant for family," said the 73 woman, but he won her heart. She was already taller than most adults by the time she was 12. At school, teachers often mistook her for a staff member when she stood in the hallway. Classmates stared up at her with wide eyes, some curious, some uncomfortable, and some unkind. Her name was rarely spoken without a pause, as if people needed a moment to adjust before talking to someone so different. She learned very early that her body entered a room before she did. At home, her family tried their best to make her feel normal. They reminded her that height was just one part of who she was, but even their love could not fully protect her from the world outside. When relatives visited, they would comment on her growth before asking how she was doing. "She's going to be a giant," someone once joked, laughing as if it were harmless. She smiled politely, but inside something tightened. Each comment stayed with her longer than people realized. Clothes were a daily struggle. Dresses never reached the right length. Sleeves always ended too soon. Shoes had to be specially ordered, often expensive and limited in style. Shopping trips, which were meant to be fun, became exhausting. Salespeople looked confused. Other customers stared. Mirrors reminded her again and again that she did not fit the standard image of a young girl. Slowly, she stopped enjoying her reflection and began to avoid it. Public places were worse. On buses, people whispered. In markets, strangers asked personal questions without shame. Some wanted photos. Others wanted explanations, as if her body needed a reason to exist. She learned to keep her head high, not because she felt confident, but because looking down meant meeting eyes filled with judgment. Silence became her shield. As she grew older, the stares changed. They became heavier, more intense. People no longer saw a child who was tall. They saw a woman who did not match their expectations of femininity. Comments became more direct. Some were meant to be jokes, others were clearly not. Each one added weight to her heart. She started believing that her body was not just different but wrong. Friendships were difficult. She was kind, thoughtful, and intelligent, but people often felt uncomfortable around her. Group photos were awkward. Conversations stopped when she approached. Even when she was included, she felt like an outsider. She laughed when others laughed, but a quiet distance always remained. She wondered what it felt like to blend in, to be unnoticed, even for a moment. When the topic of love came up among friends, she stayed quiet. They talked about crushes, dates, and future dreams. Marriage, children, family dinners. These words felt foreign to her, like stories from a world she was never meant to enter. She told herself that it was better not to hope. Hope could be painful. Hope could break her. She tried once or twice to imagine a different future. But reality always interrupted. Men either avoided her completely or focused only on her height. Some treated her like a curiosity. Others seemed intimidated. Conversations rarely lasted long. When they ended, she blamed herself. Not her personality, but her body. She began to believe that no matter how kind or loving she was, it would never be enough to overcome how she looked. Over time, she built walls around her heart. She focused on practical things, education, work, daily routines. These were areas where her height was an obstacle but not a complete barrier. She worked hard, often harder than others, to prove that she deserved her place. Success gave her some comfort, but it did not fill the empty spaces inside her. At family gatherings, questions about marriage became more frequent as the years passed. She answered politely, always with a gentle smile. "It will happen when it's meant to," she said, even though she no longer believed it. Inside, she felt tired of explaining herself, tired of pretending that she had the same hopes as everyone else. Slowly, she began to separate herself from those conversations altogether. She told herself a story, one that made the loneliness easier to accept. She said that some people were not meant for family life, that some people were built for independence, not connection. She convinced herself that her body was a sign, a message that she was meant to walk alone. Saying it out loud hurt at first, but over time it became familiar. Familiar pain felt safer than uncertain hope. There were nights when she lay awake, listening to the quiet, wondering what it would feel like to be held without hesitation, to be chosen without doubt, to be loved without conditions. These thoughts scared her. They threatened the walls she had worked so hard to build, so she pushed them away, reminding herself that dreams could be dangerous. The world continued to remind her of her difference. Every chair felt too small. Every doorway required attention. Every crowd required caution. She moved carefully, aware of her space, always trying not to inconvenience others. Apologies became a habit, even when she had done nothing wrong. She shrank herself emotionally, even though physically she could not. Despite everything, she remained gentle. She listened to others, offered advice, showed kindness where she could. People often described her as strong, but they did not see the quiet effort it took just to exist in a world that was not built for her. Strength for her was not about lifting heavy things or standing tall. It was about surviving each day without letting bitterness take over. One evening, after a long day, she stood alone by a window watching families walk by. Parents held children's hands. Couples laughed together. For a moment the walls around her heart cracked. A single thought slipped through, soft but painful. What if she was wrong? What if she was meant for more than this loneliness? She quickly pushed the thought away. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt led to hope, and hope could hurt. She took a deep breath and repeated the words she had told herself for years. Her body was too big. Her life was different. Family was not meant for her. With that belief, she turned away from the window, unaware that her story was not finished yet, and that the very certainty she clung to would soon be challenged in ways she could never imagine. By the time she reached her late 20s, the belief she carried had settled deep inside her. It was no longer just a thought that appeared during lonely moments. It had become a rule she lived by. She arranged her life carefully, keeping everything predictable. Work, home, rest. No surprises, no expectations. She told herself this was peace. Her mornings were quiet. She woke early, before the world became loud. The mirror greeted her with the same reflection every day, and she no longer searched it for answers. She dressed in clothes chosen for comfort, not attention. Neutral colors, simple styles. She did not want to stand out more than she already did. Before leaving home, she took a moment to prepare herself, not physically, but emotionally. The world could be unkind, and she needed to be ready. At work, people respected her ability. She was focused, reliable, and thoughtful. Her height still caused reactions when new people met her, but professionalism softened the shock. Some colleagues treated her with careful politeness, unsure how to act. Others asked questions that crossed personal lines, disguised as curiosity. She answered briefly and returned to her tasks. Work was a place where she could control the distance between herself and others. Lunch breaks were often spent alone. Not because no one invited her, but because she preferred it that way. Sitting with others meant answering questions, smiling through discomfort, pretending not to notice the glances from nearby tables. Alone, she could eat in peace, read, and recharge. Solitude had become her shelter. She noticed how people reacted around her. When she entered a room, conversations shifted. Chairs were moved. Space was adjusted. These actions were small, but they spoke loudly. She learned to read body language better than words. A step back. A nervous laugh. A glance exchanged between strangers. Each sign reminded her that she was always being observed. Outside of work, her life was simple. She avoided crowded places whenever possible. Shopping was done quickly. Social events were rare. Invitations came less often as time passed, not because people disliked her, but because they did not know how to include her comfortably. She understood this, and instead of feeling angry, she accepted it as another fact of her life. Family remained important to her, even though she kept parts of herself hidden from them. They worried about her loneliness, but they also respected her independence. When they asked about her future, she changed the subject gently. She did not want their concern to turn into pity. Pity hurt more than judgment. At night, when the world grew quiet, her thoughts became louder. Memories returned without warning. The first time someone laughed at her in public. The date that ended before it began. The comments that stayed with her long after they were spoken. She replayed these moments not because she wanted to, but because they had shaped her understanding of herself. She remembered a time when she had tried to be open, when she believed that kindness and honesty could overcome differences. That time ended with disappointment, and the pain that followed taught her an important lesson. Vulnerability had a cost. She decided she would not pay it again. So she built emotional walls, layer by layer. She limited how much she shared. She controlled how close people could get. She became skilled at steering conversations away from personal topics. When someone showed interest, she responded politely but firmly, creating distance before feelings could grow. It was easier to stop something early than to let it develop and risk being hurt. She often told herself that love was not the only path to a meaningful life. She reminded herself of her achievements, her strength, her independence. These reminders helped, but they did not erase the quiet longing that lived inside her. She accepted that longing as something she would carry, not something she would fulfill. The world around her continued to reinforce her beliefs. Movies, stories, advertisements all showed couples that looked nothing like her. Women who fit easily into someone else's arms. Women whose bodies were celebrated, not questioned. She stopped watching romantic stories altogether. They felt unrealistic, almost cruel. Occasionally, strangers approached her with admiration, calling her inspiring or strong. They meant well, but their words made her uncomfortable. Being admired from a distance was not the same as being loved up close. She wanted to be seen as a whole person, not a symbol or a surprise. She learned to enjoy small things, a warm cup of tea at the end of the day, the sound of rain against the window, books that allowed her to step into other lives for a while. These moments brought her calm. They reminded her that happiness did not always need to be shared to be real. Still, there were moments when the walls felt heavy, when loneliness pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. During holidays, when families gathered and laughter filled the air, she felt the absence more clearly. She attended when she could, smiled when expected, and left early when it became too much. She often wondered what her life would have been like if she had been different. Not better, just different. If she could walk into a room without being noticed, if she could sit beside someone without causing surprise. These thoughts were brief but sharp. She never allowed them to stay long. Instead, she focused on control. Control over her emotions. Control over her expectations. Control over her future. She told herself that if she did not want something, she could not miss it. If she did not believe in love, it could not disappoint her. One afternoon, while walking home, she passed a playground. Children ran freely, laughing without fear. Parents watched from benches, tired but content. She slowed her steps, observing from a distance. There was warmth in the scene, something gentle and real. For a moment she felt a deep ache, one she quickly recognized and pushed away. She reminded herself of the truth she had chosen. Her body was different. Her path was different. She was not meant for the life she saw before her. Accepting this had given her stability. Questioning it would only bring pain. That night she wrote in her journal, something she did when her thoughts became too loud. She wrote about strength, about acceptance, about letting go of dreams that did not fit reality. The words felt firm on the page, like promises she intended to keep. As she closed the journal, she felt a familiar calm return. The walls held. The rules remained. She believed she had protected her heart as best as she could. What she did not know was that protection could also become a prison. And soon, without warning, someone would step into her carefully controlled world. not to break her walls by force, but to quietly stand beside them, patient and steady, waiting for her to notice. The change did not arrive with noise or drama. It came quietly on an ordinary day, in a moment she would normally forget. She had stopped at a small bookstore after work, one she rarely visited. The place was narrow, calm, and mostly empty. She liked it because no one rushed her, and the shelves were tall enough that her height did not draw immediate attention. She was standing in the history section, reaching for a book placed high on the shelf, when she heard a voice behind her. It was polite and unsure, asking if she had already finished with the book she was holding. She turned slowly, already preparing herself for the usual reaction: surprise, curiosity, discomfort. But none of that came. The man standing there looked at her face, not her height. His expression was normal, relaxed. He smiled lightly, not nervously, not with effort. She handed him the book without speaking, and he thanked her as if this were the most ordinary interaction in the world. That small moment unsettled her more than rude comments ever had. They stood near each other for a few minutes, browsing different shelves. She expected him to move away quickly, but he did not. Instead, he asked her if she had any recommendations. The question caught her off guard. People rarely asked for her opinion in such a simple way. She hesitated, then named a book she had enjoyed recently. He listened, truly listened. When she finished speaking, he nodded and said he would check it out. No jokes, no strange remarks, just interest. When they reached the counter at the same time, they exchanged a few more words. Basic conversation. Weather, books, the quiet comfort of the shop, nothing special, and yet everything felt different. She kept waiting for the moment when he would mention her height or make it the center of the interaction. That moment never came. Outside the bookstore, they stood awkwardly for a second. She assumed this was the end. She was already preparing to walk away when he asked if she came there often. The question was gentle, not forced. She answered honestly, "No, not often." He nodded and said he was new to the area. Then he did something unexpected. He asked if she would like to grab a coffee sometime and talk more about books. The request felt unreal. Her mind searched for danger, mockery, a joke she did not understand. But his tone was steady. His eyes were kind, not curious in the wrong way. Her first instinct was to refuse. Years of protection rose inside her all at once. She reminded herself of the rules she lived by. No expectations, no hope, no opening doors that could lead to pain. She had practiced this response many times, even if she had rarely needed to use it. She smiled politely and said she was busy. He accepted the answer without disappointment, without pressure. He simply said he understood and wished her a good evening. Then he walked away. She stood there for a long moment watching him leave. Something inside her felt unsettled. Not regret exactly, but a strange awareness. He had respected her boundary. That alone was rare. For days after, she thought about that brief interaction, not obsessively but quietly. It returned to her during walks home, while making dinner, while reading before bed. She tried to dismiss it as nothing, a polite stranger, a normal moment. But it did not feel normal. A week later, she returned to the bookstore, telling herself she needed a new book. She did not admit the real reason, not even to herself. She browsed slowly, pretending not to look around. When she saw him near the front desk, her heart beat faster in a way she had not felt in years. This time, he noticed her first. He smiled again, the same calm smile, as if seeing her there made sense. He greeted her by name. She realized he had remembered it. They talked longer this time, about work, about the city, about small things that felt easy to share. He did not fill the silence unnecessarily. He did not avoid it either. When she spoke, he paid attention. When she paused, he waited. Eventually, he asked again if she would like to have coffee. This time, she did not answer immediately. She studied his face, searching for signs she had learned to look for. There were none. Against her own rules, she said yes. The cafe they chose was simple and quiet. She arrived early, choosing a table near the window. When he walked in, she noticed how naturally he moved toward her without hesitation. He did not scan the room. He did not appear nervous. He greeted her warmly and sat down as if this were the most natural thing to do. Their conversation flowed easily. They talked about childhood memories, favorite books, small disappointments, and simple joys. She found herself laughing, not out of politeness, but because she genuinely felt light. She caught herself mid-laugh and felt a wave of fear. This was dangerous territory. At one point, she apologized for her height without thinking. The words slipped out, shaped by years of habit. The moment she said them, she regretted it. She waited for his reaction. He looked confused. "Why would you apologize for that?" he asked gently. No one had ever asked her that before. She did not know how to answer. The silence stretched, uncomfortable but honest. Finally, she said what she had believed for years, that she took up too much space, that people found her uncomfortable, that she was used to being different. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. Then he said something simple that stayed with her long after. "I don't feel uncomfortable," he said. "I feel like I'm talking to someone interesting." There was no dramatic speech, no promise, just truth. After that day, they began meeting occasionally, always simple plans. Coffee, walks, bookstore visits. He never pushed for more. He never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He never made her feel like she needed to explain herself. She noticed how consistent he was. His kindness did not change. His attention did not fade. He treated her with the same respect in private and in public. When people stared, he did not react. When chairs were moved or space was adjusted, he did not make it awkward. He simply stayed beside her. Still, she remained careful. She kept parts of herself hidden. She avoided talking about the future. She reminded herself daily that this could not last, that people changed, that kindness sometimes had limits. Yet slowly, something inside her began to soften. She found herself looking forward to his messages. She noticed how her home felt warmer after spending time with him. She smiled more easily. These changes frightened her. They meant the walls she had built were no longer untouched. One evening, after they parted ways, she stood alone on the sidewalk and realized something important. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible or exposed. She felt seen. That realization scared her more than loneliness ever had. She told herself to be careful, to slow down, to protect herself. But deep inside, a quiet truth was forming. This man had entered her life without trying to change her, without trying to fix her, without treating her body as a problem. And though she was not ready to admit it, something had already shifted. The belief she had carried for so long had cracked slightly, just enough to let a small, unfamiliar feeling through. Hope. The change inside her did not happen all at once. It moved slowly, like light entering a room through a narrow opening. She noticed it in small ways at first. She woke up with a lighter feeling in her chest. She caught herself smiling while doing ordinary tasks. These moments confused her, because happiness had always felt temporary and risky. Now it was arriving quietly, without asking permission. They continued meeting, never rushing, never forcing anything. Some days they talked for hours, and other days they simply walked side by side, sharing the comfort of silence. She appreciated that he never tried to fill every moment with words. Silence around him felt safe, not awkward. It gave her space to breathe. Still, fear stayed close. Whenever she felt too comfortable, her mind reminded her of the past. It showed her memories she had tried to forget. The times she believed in someone and ended up hurt. The times she thought she was seen, only to be reduced to her appearance. These memories rose like warnings, telling her to step back before it was too late. One afternoon, they were walking through a park. Families were scattered across the grass. Children played. Couples sat close together, laughing softly. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This was the kind of place she usually avoided. It reflected everything she believed she could not have. She slowed her steps without realizing it. He noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to smile and move on, but something inside her resisted. The walls she had built were tired. Holding them up required effort, and for the first time she wondered what would happen if she let one small part fall. She told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. She said places like this made her uncomfortable. That seeing families reminded her of a life she never thought she would live. That she had convinced herself she was not meant for it. He listened carefully, his expression calm. When she finished, she waited for reassurance or correction. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Who told you that?" She did not answer right away, because the truth was no one had said those exact words. The belief had grown from years of looks, comments, silences, and disappointments. It had formed slowly until it felt like a fact rather than a fear. "I guess I did," she said finally. He nodded, thinking. "Beliefs can feel very real," he said, "even when they start as protection." That word stayed with her, protection. She had never thought of it that way. She had always seen her distance as acceptance, as maturity, but hearing it described as protection made her realize something important. She had not given up on love because she did not want it. She had given up because she was afraid of losing it. After that day, she found herself thinking more deeply about the choices she had made. She noticed how often she held back, how quickly she assumed rejection, how easily she dismissed her own desires. These habits had once kept her safe. Now they felt heavy. There were moments when fear tried to take control again. When he stood beside her in public, she worried about how others saw them. She worried about what people thought when they noticed the difference between them. She worried that one day he would grow tired of the attention, the adjustments, the constant awareness. One evening she voiced this fear aloud. They were sitting across from each other at a small table, cups untouched. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "I don't want to make your life harder." He looked surprised, not offended, not defensive. "You don't," he said simply. She tried to explain the stares, the questions, the way the world reacted to her body. She told him she was used to apologizing for existing, even when no one asked her to. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to overwhelm her. "I choose where I stand," he said, "and I choose to stand here." There was no promise beyond that, no grand statement about forever, just a clear, honest choice. It meant more to her than anything dramatic ever could. Slowly she allowed herself to relax around him. She shared more of her thoughts. She talked about her childhood, her struggles, the loneliness she had carried for so long. Each time she opened up, she waited for distance to appear. Each time it did not. He never tried to fix her feelings. He did not tell her she was wrong to feel the way she did. He accepted her experiences as real and valid. That acceptance felt unfamiliar and powerful. There were still challenges. The world did not change just because her heart was opening. People still stared. Spaces were still uncomfortable. Comments still happened. But now she did not face them alone. When someone spoke carelessly, he did not rush to defend her loudly or dramatically. He stood close, steady and calm, letting her decide how to respond. His presence was quiet support, not control. That mattered to her more than anything else. One day, she introduced him to her family. The idea had terrified her. She worried about how they would react, what they would think, what they might say. She worried that this step would make everything too real, too fragile. But the meeting was simple. He greeted them respectfully. He listened more than he spoke. He treated her with the same care he always did. Her family noticed. They saw the way she relaxed around him, the way her voice softened, the way her eyes lit up. Later that night, after he left, a family member hugged her tightly and said, "You seem happy." She had not realized how visible it was. That night she lay awake, thinking about the word happy. She tested it in her mind, unsure if she was allowed to claim it. Happiness had always felt like something temporary, something borrowed. Now it felt like something she might be building. Still, doubt returned in quiet moments. She worried that this connection depended on time, that something would eventually change. She feared that her past beliefs would prove true after all. One evening, overwhelmed by these thoughts, she told him she was scared. "Of what?" he asked. "Of trusting this," she said. "Of trusting myself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Trust doesn't mean certainty. It just means choosing not to run." That stayed with her. She realized that for most of her life she had been running. Not physically, but emotionally. Running from hope, running from connection, running from the chance to be seen fully. Now, standing still felt just as frightening as it was freeing. As weeks passed, she noticed a shift inside herself. She no longer apologized for her body as often. She corrected herself when negative thoughts appeared. She allowed herself to imagine small pieces of a future, not as a plan but as a possibility. She still believed in caution. She still respected her boundaries. But she no longer believed that she was too much for love. One evening, while walking together under soft streetlights, she realized something quietly powerful. The fear had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. For the first time, she was not measuring her worth by how well she could protect herself from pain. She was measuring it by how honestly she could show up, even when afraid. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. The walls around her heart were no longer solid. They had openings now. Light came through, and for the first time in her life she did not close them. The final change did not feel dramatic. There was no single moment where everything suddenly became clear. Instead, it felt like waking up one day and realizing that something heavy was no longer sitting on her chest. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now. It no longer decided everything for her. She began to notice how different her days felt. She moved through the world with less tension in her shoulders. When she walked beside him, she no longer counted the stairs or measured the distance between them. She still noticed those things, but they did not define the moment anymore. What mattered more was how natural it felt to be there, walking at the same pace, sharing the same direction. One evening they sat together in her living room, the lights low, the city quiet outside the window. They were not doing anything special. Just talking, pausing, letting the conversation move slowly. At one point she looked at him and felt a sudden wave of emotion she could not name. It was not excitement or fear. It was something steadier. "I used to think my life was already decided," she said softly. He waited. "I thought my body decided it for me," she continued. "I thought it was a rule I couldn't change. That it was better to accept that than keep hoping." His hand was warm, steady, not trying to claim her, just there. "Beliefs can change," he said, "especially the ones we built to protect ourselves. Not big promises or perfect pictures, just simple moments. Shared meals, shared worries, shared silence." She realized that family was not a shape or a standard. It was not about fitting into something small. It was about building something honest. They faced challenges together. There were days when the weight of the world returned, when comments from strangers or uncomfortable situations reopened old wounds. On those days, she reminded herself that pain did not erase progress. Healing was not a straight line. Sometimes she needed space. Sometimes she needed reassurance. She learned to ask for what she needed instead of assuming she was asking for too much. Each time she spoke honestly and he stayed, a little more of her fear loosened its grip. One day they attended a gathering together, a place she would have avoided in the past. The room was full, the noise loud. She felt the familiar tension rise, but this time she did not retreat. She took a breath and stepped forward. People noticed them. Some stared. Some whispered. Some said nothing at all. For the first time she did not try to disappear. She stood tall, not out of defiance but out of acceptance. This was her body. This was her life. She did not need permission to exist in it. Later that night, as they walked home, she felt exhausted but proud. "I didn't think I could do that," she admitted. "You did," he said, "not because you changed who you are, but because you trusted yourself." She began to reconnect with parts of herself she had buried, dreams she had labeled unrealistic, emotions she had kept locked away. She allowed herself to feel joy without immediately waiting for it to disappear. She allowed herself to feel sadness without judging it as weakness. Her relationship with her family changed too. She spoke more openly. She shared her fears and hopes instead of hiding behind polite answers. They listened, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with tears. Healing happened there as well, slow and imperfect, but real. One evening, while sitting together, she said something she had never believed she would say. "I think I want a family," she said quietly. She waited, heart racing, afraid of how the words would sound once spoken. He did not react with surprise or pressure. He simply nodded. "We can talk about what that means," he said. "There's no rush." She realized then that love had never required her to be smaller. It required her to be present, honest, willing. The belief that she was too big slowly lost its power. It no longer lived at the center of her thoughts. It became just another memory, a story from an earlier version of herself who had done her best with what she knew. There were moments when doubt returned, quietly asking if this was temporary, if she was waiting for something to break. When that happened, she reminded herself of the truth she had learned. Nothing in life came with guarantees. Avoiding love did not protect her from pain. It only protected her from joy. Standing by the window one night, watching the city lights, she remembered a time when she had stood alone in that same place, convinced that her story was already written. She remembered how small the world had felt then. Now it felt open. She turned to him and smiled, a real smile, unguarded. "I'm glad I didn't run," she said. "So am I," he replied. The woman who once believed she was not meant for family now understood something deeper. She was not meant to fit into someone else's idea of life. She was meant to live her own, fully and honestly, with someone who saw her not as too much but as exactly enough. Her body had never been the problem. The world's expectations had been. And by choosing love over fear, she had reclaimed more than a relationship. She had reclaimed herself. This was not the end of her challenges. Life would still bring difficulty, change, and uncertainty, but she no longer faced those things from a place of isolation. She faced them knowing she was worthy of connection, worthy of care, and worthy of building a future on her own terms. And that truth, once impossible to imagine, became the quiet strength she carried forward every single day.